Affiliated Society's East Coast Conference. My name is Ethan Kaimana, and I will be moderating this panel discussion of what is a political party for the left. As a brief introduction, the Platypus Affiliated Society organizes reading groups, public fora, research, and journalism focused on problems and tasks inherited from the old 1920s to 1930s, new 1960s to 1970s, and post-political 1980s to 1990s left for the possibilities of emancipatory politics today. This is the second of our three-day East Coast convention, conference. Tomorrow, we will be hosting a teach-in on Fanon's Wretched of the Earth, as well as another panel discussion. What is the critique of capitalism? You can find the information for that on posters close by to here, but both of them will be hosted in this room. The teach-in from 1:30 to 3:30, and the panel discussion from 4:30 to 6:30. So I will be introducing our panelists here in order of their introductory remarks. So starting with here, Shuvu Batta is a Nepali-American labor organizer and a member of the New York City Democratic Socialists of America in Queens, right here. Donald Parkinson is a regular contributor to Cosmonaut magazine and operates within the Democratic Socialists of America in the Marxist Unity Group. Dr. Anthony Monteiro, right here, has a long history as an activist in the left, starting with the civil rights movement and the Black freedom movement, and helped elect several black candidates. Dr. Monteiro is a scholar of W.B. Du Bois and the founder of the Saturday Free School for Philosophy and Black Liberation in Philadelphia. Tom Canel, who is a socialist and labor organizer, right here. And finally, Roy Landerson, who is a member of the Socialist Workers' Party US and a writer for the SWP's journal, The Militant. For the past 4 years, Roy has worked at a socialist news weekly published in the interest of the working people. He has been a longtime member of the International Communist Movement in Australia as a trade unionist, including 5 years as a wharfie in the Maritime Union of Australia, as well as in food processing, meat packing, and warehouse work. So, as mentioned, this discussion is entitled, What is a Political Party for the Left? What is the point of a political party for Marxism? Where do we stand with respect to the task of building this political party today? And how can Marxism help clarify this task? So I will be giving 10 minutes of introductory remarks to each of our panelists here on this topic and these larger questions. So starting with Shuvu.
Okay. Well, all right then. So thank you, Platypus, for holding this meeting today. I believe that this work in uniting socialists from various backgrounds to share their perspective, it's a valuable contribution to developing the path towards the ultimate goal of world liberation from wage slavery and violence. I'm glad to be able to learn from everybody here. To be honest, I'm a bit puzzled as to why I was invited to speak, but since I have the floor, I will try to use this opportunity to the full. Regarding the prompt, I disagree with the framing of this question. I don't think there is any need for a political party that calls itself Marxist. Marx himself would have hated for his name alone to represent the historical mission of the world proletariat. I think it's time to bury forever this tendency among socialists to tie their movements towards individuals. We should base our movement around its mission. And at this moment, the mission is to overthrow the minority rule under capitalism and replace it with democratic majority rule under socialism. What is necessary at this moment is unity among all socialists under the organizational form of a mass socialist party, which develops through a fierce culture of criticism and decision-making and iron discipline in action. This party must achieve unity not through agreement on theoretical points and abstract values, as is the case in the majority of socialist sects, but through common agreement on what majority rule looks like. In short, we need a mass socialist party united with the mission of guiding the working class towards the establishment of a world democratic republic, which is socialism. Why and how can such a party be built? To answer this question, it is necessary to look at the current situation and its balance of forces. We have to internalize and understand that we are in a class war, perhaps more accurately, a class genocide, with the capitalists in control of a highly centralized army, with the forces of the working class largely disorganized and in disarray. The victory of the capitalist class will mean humanity's destruction, and the victory of the working class will mean humanity's liberation. The war for socialism is essentially a military struggle, and there is nowhere in the world that we can hide to escape this war. Currently, humanity is inching closer and closer to the twin catastrophes of global nuclear annihilation and climate disaster. To maintain its global hegemony and control of the world's natural resources, the United States and its military allies have stoked tensions with China and Russia, with the war in Ukraine threatening to spill over into a nuclear exchange. Effects of climate change are being felt with greater intensity every passing year, with record heat waves, floods, hurricanes, and other natural disasters, which are already disrupting global supply chains and food production. The capitalist class's inability to control global production will only make things worse until the working class is able to seize power. Internally, governments around the world are faced with growing inequality, poverty, and desperation among the working masses. The unquenchable greed of the capitalist class is driving up prices in order to extract even more profit. The response of governments has been to blame inflation on the working class through the raising of interest rates, which is an attempt to increase mass layoffs and unemployment so that working people have less bargaining power and wages stay stagnant. The world capitalist class has been able to maintain its death march despite periodic ruptures and resistance from the world working class, because it has control over the state, which is in essence the armed forces and the political/legal structure of the various nations of the world. I don't have the knowledge to speak of other countries, and as activists in the belly of the beast, the great Satan of the world, let's focus on the United States. Discontent in the United States is managed primarily through a complex system of legality. As a tool of controlling discontent, working people are given an illusion of democracy, voting for representatives who can lie straight to their face and are not accountable to them. There is no serious contender to the Democratic and Republican parties, both top-down organizations whose politics are determined by their top donors, which are of course members of the capitalist class. Lobbying and bribing inside the halls of power by the big-moneyed groups is the true indicator of how government actually functions. Of course, the highest levels of governance are wholly undemocratic. The president is elected undemocratically through delegates, not popular vote, with emergency powers which could easily lead to dictatorship. The Senate gives disproportionate representation to right-wing areas, and the Supreme Court justices are appointed for life with the power to overturn virtually any law. The Central Bank of the United States, the Federal Reserve, is a wholly undemocratic and unaccountable institution, yet it has the power to direct trillions of dollars of funds and greatly influence the global financial system. The result ends up being that year after year, despite working people in the US wanting things like free medical care, an end to war overseas, tax hikes on the rich, real action on climate change, etc., the opposite ends up happening. The other avenues of legal struggle are also wholly insufficient. Working people can struggle through trade unions, but after the New Deal era, labor struggle became absorbed and neutralized through legality. Though only composed of 7 to 8% of the working class, trade unions still contain huge potential power, as the critical logistics industry shows, with port workers, railroad workers, and transit workers all represented by unions. However, their fundamental power, the strike, is limited by their contracts or made illegal outright, with unions, for example, facing financial destitution through injunctions for engaging in an illegal strike, quote-unquote illegal strike. Under Taft-Hartley, solidarity strikes and sit-downs have also been illegalized, putting trade union leadership in a position where they're conditioned to isolate strikes, thereby severely limiting the force of the working class. Working people have also struggled through illegal actions, and in this we can see the physical force of the state act in unison with its electoral, legal, and propaganda arms. The most recent example of mass illegal resistance in the United States, the 2020 George Floyd protests, gives us a glimpse of both how the capitalist class crushes working class opposition in this country, and also of how protests can potentially be transformed into permanent organization. A report of the 2020 protest titled Big Brick Energy by the communist collective Unity and Struggle provides a detailed account of the movement. Under conditions of lockdown and general angst among the US working class, the police murder of a single individual was enough to spark the largest protest movement in US history, with protests in over 500 cities and towns, estimated 15 to 26 million people in attendance. The development of the internet, widely accessible computers, and social media were the preconditions for the size, scale, and speed of this movement. The general message of the movement was a cry for the cessation of violence, emphasized by "I Can't Breathe," "Black Lives Matter," and "Stop Police Brutality." The protests were started mostly by the young black and brown working class. News of protests was spread through social media. The times were such that a post by just some dude calling for a protest would get dozens or hundreds of people showing up. The people showing up to the protests were people that were there to be organized to accomplish the mission, stop police violence. For the first few weeks, as the protests grew in size and intensity, there was a vacuum of leadership. At the same time, curfews were enforced and police repression, the launching of tear gas, beating, and arrests increased. Some areas, such as Minneapolis, Seattle, and Atlanta, were able to go the furthest by pushing back the police and organizing the protesters on the ground into autonomous zones. There was also the corporate media outcry of the supposed violence of protesters, which helped in mobilizing fascist elements to enter the protests. As police violence slowed down and contained the movement, under an absence of socialist political vision, NGOs and Democratic Party politicians were able to dissipate the movement's energy in concessionary reforms and token police firings. Trade union leaderships were generally silent in the movement's initial stages till the movement became sanitized by the liberal bourgeoisie. During the period of the vacuum of leadership, the desperate protests could have been transformed into general democratic assemblies and united nationally, pushing demands which connected the fight against police brutality with the fight against capitalist brutality in all forms, growing its forces into a mass general strike organization capable of forcing a socialist constitution. This opportunity was wasted because there was an inadequate socialist cadre organization on the ground with a clear plan of action.
Concluding remarks, please.
Wait, oh yeah?
Yeah, sorry.
All right, well, fuck, maybe I should just save it for later, dude. Like, what do you think? Or should I just...
Oh,
finish?
for like your
okay.
opening statement, I mean, not like an
sorry.
overall conclusion.
The largest socialist organization in the country, the DSA, with an activist base of professional workers, NGO, and union staffers, had its politics so tied to legal methods of struggle that it was largely absent as an organized force in the protests. Many cadre sects were left hopelessly pamphleteering, whereas the NGOs, which were providing material support and came through with a completely opportunist plan, were able to divert and destroy the movement through class collaborationist politics. The reason for a mass socialist party remains unchanged since the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party was formed to unite socialist sects, and since Lenin wrote "What is to be done," which is to help develop the spontaneous struggles of the working class into a general struggle for political freedom. What has changed is the form and conditions under which such a party will emerge. In the United States, the socialist movement is still very disparate, but the DSA exists as an open tent organization which has brought together various socialists from different traditions, anarchists, Maoists, Stalinists, Trotskyists, under a single organization. It is an organization that is amenable to change and allows for the formation of factions. And there's been a significant leap forward with the adoption of a political platform explicitly calling for a socialist constitution, but there exist serious flaws which strengthen the class collaborationist elements of the organization. For the DSA to become the mass socialist party the working class needs, it must 1, adopt methods of political debate and clarification internally, 2, develop a powerful media site as a source of information about the organization for activists and for developing socialist analysis, 3, adopt methods of discipline for members, especially electeds like AOC and Bowman, who violate the party platform. And finally, it's crucial to unite the socialist elements of the DSA for this change to occur, and I applaud Marxist Unity Group's efforts towards this direction. However, it is just as crucial to recognize that the role of the Socialist Party is to generalize, bring together, and extend to the full the spontaneous struggle of the masses into a center of power. The Russian Revolution was not willed into existence by the Bolsheviks. It would not have been possible without the Soviet. The Soviet, a general strike organization, in turn, would not have been possible without the presence of socialist workers who were trained and developed by the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party. A workers' revolution cannot take place without a worker center of power. At this historical moment, as catastrophe approaches and the US state increasingly adopts dictatorial forms of rule, It is of urgent necessity to generalize the disparate strike and protest struggles developing as evidenced by the Amazon Labor Union, Starbucks Workers United, the various strikes and abortion rights protests, etc., in this country through a general strike movement based on the general demands representing the needs of all of the oppressed. It is necessary to use social selectives wherever they may be to amplify and grow this movement. The American Soviet, which I call the Working People's Union, will be an organ of proletarian democracy, and it must be built through a united front. Such an organization will be able to expose and rip apart the contradictions of the US government, for the capitalists are forced to rely on the working class to administer much of the state. Through its general demands, which resonates with the entire working population, the Working People's Union will attract the rank and file of the military and government workers, which will in effect disarm the capitalist class and make possible the establishment of a socialist United States. As step towards that dream, socialists must get into the habit of attempting to generalize and bring together the working class in permanent organization and take full advantage of rupture when it happens. It is in this spirit that I'm proud to announce that in the midst of a historic real workers' struggle in the US, I, alongside some comrades, are helping to organize a mass solidarity meeting sponsored by Haymarket Books and Railroad Workers United, a rank and file organization that unites rail workers from different unions. Right now, we're in the process of organizing the solidarity meeting by reaching out to different worker and socialist organizations to get them to co-sponsor. I hope that we will advertise this meeting officially in the near future. So sorry for being too long, but that's all I have to say. Thank you.
So I think my talk is going to be a little bit more historical. So essentially, in the 19th century, we have the birth of what is known as the modern socialist movement. And this initially took the form of various what I would call sects. They were a small group of people usually that were usually united around the writings of a particularly intelligent and charismatic individual. You had, in the French Revolution, so technically, even before then, but you have the Babouvists. In England, you have the rise of the ideas of Robert Owen, the Owenites. You have sects based on the ideas of Thomas Paine, Thomas Spence, Saint Simon, Fourier, Proudhon, etc. And this is essentially the form that the existing socialist movement takes. And you see also the rise of a working class union movement. You have various uprisings of the working class. You have various unions, especially craft unions, that are actually probably closer to medieval guilds than modern industrial unions. But there is something that happens in the UK that completely changes the political terrain, which is the rise of Chartism. And I think this is an important thing to talk about regarding the question of a political party for the left, because I think that Chartism has kind of been forgotten. And the importance of Chartism for Marxism is honestly not talked about. You have the three sources and components of Marxism by Lenin. It's English political economy, German philosophy, and French utopian socialism. But there's a fourth that is not listed, which is Chartism. And the idea of the People's Charter is what unified the Chartist movement. It was essentially a list of, I think, three basic demands. The most important one was a vote for every man over the age of 21, secret ballot, no property qualifications for members, payments for MPs, so poor men could serve, constituencies of equal size, annual elections. And so with the rise of Chartism, you have a new idea, an advancement from the ideas of the utopian socialists, the idea of a political party of the working class that fights for political democracy in the names of the interest of the working class. And it's an organization that is not united around the ideas of any specific thinker like Robert Owen or whoever else, but it is organized and united around the charter, the program, the demands. And in the Communist Manifesto, there's an important quote. Marx says that the communists are distinguished from the other working class parties by this only. of the national struggle of the proletarians of different countries. They point out and bring to the front the common interests of the entire proletariat, independently of all nationality. And 2, in the various stages of development, which the struggle of the working class against the bourgeoisie has to pass through, they always and everywhere represent the interests of the movement as a whole. So I think, this is a famous quote, but the context that is missing is essentially the idea that the communists are operating as a faction within the broader Chartist movement. Yet, at the same time, we have Marx's transformation from the communist of the Communist League from the League of the Just. And there's the historical sequence of the 1848 revolution. The Communist League tries to kind of play a vanguard role within this broader spontaneous uprising. And what happens is a defeat of the proletariat and a wave of just complete agony and cynicism, But what's interesting is that Marx actually, in a letter, says that essentially the Communist League was a reversion to the sectarian, Babouvist, conspiratorial type of organization, and that it was actually a regression from the form of organization that the Chartists offered. So you then have the rise of the International Working Men's Association, the First International, and this is essentially what a party of the whole class would look like. There's a myth that the Second International was about creating parties of the whole class, but I think that this is actually what the First International was. The idea was that it would essentially be a forum for all different tendencies of the workers' movement to unite and work through their differences. It was very much focused on solidarity with the Polish national movement. And so I think this is also, it was actually a kind of a regression from the idea of the Chartists, because what you have is the idea that the First International represents the general unity of the entire working class, which includes Marxists, various nationalist groups, and of course the Bakuninists, the Proudhonists, and there's of course the famous split between the Marxists and the Bakuninists over the question of political action. So essentially what happens with the collapse of the First International is you have the split with the anarchists, you have all these witch hunts against the International, you have the idea of the Bakuninists, the idea that we have to immediately abolish the state and introduce communal anarchy, that political action is not the way forward for the working class, whereas Marx, in the tradition of the Chartists, is emphasizing that political action is essentially the main priority of the working class, that the working class unites around its tasks of fighting for political democracy. So let's go to Germany now, where you have the General Association of German Workers, the ADAV, initially organized by Lassalle. And this is, it's not actually really a Chartist type party, but it is a kind of, honestly, a kind of bureaucratic centralist organization. Lassalle rejects the priority of the battle for democracy. He essentially runs his own organization as a kind of labor monarchist. He believes in allying with the conservative aristocracy against the bourgeoisie. And then you have the Eisenbach party of Wilhelm Liebknecht and August Bebel. And there's they represent essentially a more Marxist approach. They're in collaboration with Marx. They're talking to him through letters. And so there's a fusion of the ADAV, the Lassallians, and the Eisenbach party. And this is represented by the formation of the Gotha program, which we all know through Marx's critique primarily. Marx is very much critical of the Gotha program. he very much thinks that it's not based on a proper scientific analysis of society, that it contains various flaws within it. And essentially, the Gotha program, regardless of Marx's critiques, I do think, nonetheless represents a movement forward from the first international idea of a party of the whole class and the utopian socialist idea of these sectarian groups organized around the specific intellectuals' visions. And what it's moving towards is what is called by basically all Marxists of this time as the merger of the workers' movement and socialism. Socialists are essentially an intellectual movement. They are utopians. They are organized around their visions of re-engineering society. And it eventually, it develops as an intellectual critique of society. But the workers' movement, with Chartism and the union movement, develops separately from this. And what you have with the formation of the ADAV and then the Second International is essentially the merger of the socialist movement and the broader workers' movement. And I think what we have here is the idea that the party is organized around its political program, all right? And the political program
I want to give you a quick 2-minute warning. I'm sorry.
And the political program is influenced by the theoretical ideas of Marxism. The actual membership of the party, the actual central kind of binding force of the party is not the belief in the theoretical ideas of Karl Marx, but it is around the program of the party, which is increasingly influenced by the ideas of Karl Marx. And in 1891, with the German Social Democratic Party, we have the Erfurt program, which in my opinion is a classic example of a program that successfully takes the scientific socialist ideas of Marx and integrates them into a programmatic vision without essentially requiring a conformity to the specific political views of Marx. So, what happens next? Social democracy collapses over World War I, and you have the rise of Bolshevism. Well, Bolshevism as a faction in the RSDLP already exists, but what you have is the Russian Revolution, the rise of the Comintern, the crisis of social democracy. And what happens is, with the rise of the Comintern, they have these 21 conditions that are a necessary means of splitting the existing social democratic parties between revolutionaries and reformists. And what happens is, essentially, in my opinion, there's an advancement in the Comintern towards these ideas of revolutionary defeatism. There's a more fully internationalist perspective. But at the same time, I think there's a kind of movement away from the radical democratic ideas of Chartism and the idea of a party united around the program. And from there on, you get the rise of the ideas of Marxism, Leninism. You get various splits and a reversion to the ideas of utopian socialist sects that are united around the teachings of various influential leaders. So my argument is that the left essentially needs to recover the lessons of Chartism, which is very old, yet I think there's a slogan I use, which is, if it's not broke, you don't fix it. And I think that a lot of the historical lineage that brought Marxism to where it is today has kind of been ignored as being irrelevant and dated. But I think that if we're going to successfully rebuild a political party for the left that's founded around the Marxist principles, we have to basically rediscover these ideas and apply them to our current context. In my opinion, this entails a workers' party organized around a minimum program for radical democracy that will put the working class in power, and a maximum program for the socialization of the economy and the transition into communism.
Thank you. I think the question before us is one of the more difficult questions that we confront. It is not being raised for the first time at this moment. If you look back, and when I say look back, I'm not going back to 19th or early 20th century Europe or even Asia, but the United States. There was a passionate and fierce debate that took place in the middle 70s after the winning of certain victories by the civil rights or black freedom movement. And many activists and radicals put on the table the need for the formation of a new communist party. Of course, this was in the wake of the Black Panther Party, the All African People's Revolutionary Party, and other such organizations. The new communist movement, as it was called, was a failure. It neither succeeded in building a revolutionary party, nor did it advance the development of cadre that could build such a party. In many ways, it was putting the cart before the horse, which means that one, those who were part of this movement did not understand the American revolutionary process. I wish to underline that, the American revolutionary process, nor did they understand the American people. Therefore, it is not an abstract question, the formation of a political party. We can decide to form a political party today, and we could all call ourselves members of that party. But besides doing something that would maybe make us feel good, what would it mean in relationship to the great crisis, political crisis, that this nation faces? I would argue very little. The next question that I would put is, would the formation of a left political party make much of a difference in advancing the crisis or advancing the working people and the people as a whole? These are very hard questions, and I think to answer them, we have to start somewhere else. In other words, let me put it this way. We have to understand something that I talked about in the last panel, the logic of American history, the logic of the formation of the US working class, the relationship between the working class and the system of class exploitation and the equally significant system of white supremacy. These are issues and problems that not even Lenin and the Bolsheviks faced. These are problems, I would argue, of a world historic nature. Lester said in our last panel, and I agree with that, the outcome of the struggle in this country will have world historic significance. In many ways, in the 21st century, the course of the revolutionary process might take on as great a significance as the Bolshevik or Russian Revolution took in the early part of the 20th century. Now, having said all of that, I would like to cast my vote against forming a political party at this time. I would say that the forces to successfully form a revolutionary party do not exist at this time. There has not been a period where radical socialist and communist forces have enough experience in the struggles of working people to make of them a cadre that could form, I'm going to use the word, a communist party. It's just not there. Where we are is in a unique period where the system, the political system, is in the greatest crisis of its history. The people have declared the government, some would say the regime, as illegitimate. It is becoming clearer that the ruling class cannot rule in the old way, and the people are not allowing themselves, will not allow themselves to be ruled in the old way. The forms that these struggles will take are not yet determined. However, the cadre that would lead in the formation of a communist party have not yet gone through the fire of revolutionary class struggle. Just not there yet. However, even if the best or optimal conditions existed right now to form a communist party, or at least from our assessment, we decide by vote we should go forward and announce that we are forming a political party. We have a website, phone numbers, and in every city that we can, we have representatives of this party. The question is, will that be the best deployment of the energies of radicals?
I'm going to give you a quick 2-minute warning, Tony. 2-minute warning.
Okay. I would say even under optimal conditions, we still have to ask the question, will the process of revolutionary transformation, and I would argue, I want to define what I mean by revolution, and I'm not speaking in ultimate terms. Ultimately, we do want the state to wither away, but we're not at the stage of debating ultimates now. We're at the stage of debating and thinking about and theorizing about the path to a new democracy, a revolutionary democracy, a people's democracy. That will require a great deal of sophistication. Now, we have seen that in the past, as you all know. I look highly upon the Black freedom movement of the 50s and 60s. I consider it a revolutionary movement in the revolutionary democratic sense. Some people say if it's not a socialist revolution, it's not a revolution. I don't agree with that at all. And I think that is one of the great problems that we face. And it isolates us from the broad mass of people. What I believe is that, as in the case of Philadelphia, where we have a Saturday free school and we operate among broad masses of people, sadly not enough in the trade union movement, but there are reasons for that. But the only place that the working class exists is not in trade unions. In fact, a smaller part of them are there. We see churches, we see community organizations, we see mosques, and so on and so forth. I'll end on this. I think the paradigm for this stage looks more like the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s than it does like the Bolshevik movement of February 1917 going forward. Can I just say one last point?
Okay.
You know, it is always appealing, especially for intellectuals like ourselves, to look at things in their abstract, universal character. The question is the concrete, the real. And I would, as we go forward in this panel, like to have us share our experiences in building movements and what are people saying and how do we, wherever we come from, actualize and participate and contribute to the struggles of the people, and in so doing, acquire the experience that comes from being in the fires of struggle that are necessary to build a movement, a revolutionary movement, a democratic movement for the future. Sorry.
Thank you. Thanks to Platypus for inviting me to speak today. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. In his essay, The Marxism of Rosa Luxemburg, Lukács outlined the revolutionary Marxist conception of the party a number of times. Some quotes from the essay. Quote, "The form taken by the class consciousness of the proletariat is the party." Quote, "The proletariat can constitute itself as a class only in and through revolution." Quote, "The party is assigned the sublime role of bearer of the class consciousness of the proletariat and the conscience of its historical vocation." The discerned failure, the discerned failure of the proletariat internationally after 1919 to extend the revolution to the rest of Europe and North America in particular was associated for revolutionary Marxists with the loss or at least lack of a proletarian revolutionary class consciousness and conscience of the proletariat's historical vocation. Psychoanalysis predicts that psyches will generate a defense against such a loss of an object of desire or love. The psyche either invents an imaginary object or endows an existent object with special properties to obscure the pain of psychic loss. My claim is that the party, or at least the idea of the party, has become a psychic balm, a fetish in Freudian terms, to cover up the decision of the working class not to live up to Marxist expectations. Lenin's invention of a party of a new kind was based on an analysis, a sober one, of the proletariat's political potential. Lenin soberly saw that at best the proletariat would develop revolutionary consciousness unevenly, and that it would probably not gel into a single revolutionary collective subject. Taking opportunities for the revolutionary seizure of power would then require the organization of the more advanced sections of the proletariat into a vanguard party, so that they could either elevate the backward layers' consciousness or at least secure those layers' acceptance of the revolutionary process. However, during the civil war following the Bolshevik seizure of power in Russia, many of the revolutionary elements of the proletariat were recruited either into the Red Army or state administration, while many of the remainder of the industrial working class returned to the countryside and resumed peasant life. The human basis for proletarian and revolutionary consciousness, actual proletarians, was dispersed into the Soviet bureaucracy and Russia's agricultural and battlefields. Arguably, this made the devolution of an alleged dictatorship of the proletariat in Russia into a dictatorship of a revolutionary party more or less inevitable, at least if counter-revolution was to be staved off. To legitimate itself, the rule of the party had to be presented as the rule of the proletariat, even though that proletariat had become almost non-existent in Russia. An organization of ideologically driven cadres was endowed with the properties of a revolutionary class to cover the loss of proletarian class consciousness and indeed the proletariat as such. Over time, even communist revolutionary parties degenerated in all kinds of ways, both in Russia and around the world. To address this, Trotskyists split off from the Stalinized communist movement and attempted to reconstitute revolutionary parties in multiple countries. This, as we all know, generally went nowhere. Instead, we got a rash of ostensibly revolutionary groups, ORGs, or orgs, as Chris Cretone has put it, which claim somehow to be the revolutionary party in embryo, or some kind of a precursor to the revolutionary party. If the revolutionary party compensates for the loss of proletarian revolutionary subjectivity, as I claim, the ostensibly revolutionary group compensates for the lack of a revolutionary party. One might say a fetish obscuring the loss of another fetish. That the contemporary American left is dominated by the democratic socialists of America is demonstrated by how so many of the surviving orgs and unaffiliated revolutionary Marxists were driven to enter DSA. As we can read in the Marxist Unity Caucus's platform, published just recently on the Cosmonaut magazine site, many DSAers do aspire to the formation of some kind of workers' party. The Cosmonaut piece seems, and Donald will correct me with whatever misinterpretation I impose, to discern two different kinds of party to which people aspire. Some people want to create a genuinely revolutionary party through a clean break of the Democratic Party. Others want to create a broader, more inclusive workers' party as a result of a more or less clean or dirty break. I would argue that in both cases, the party is used as a balm or fetish to numb us to the political reality of working class politics. With respect to the broader workers' party idea, this is associated with the assumption that collecting people currently on the left wing of the Democratic Party under a banner saying Workers' Party is going to in itself reconstitute revolutionary class consciousness. In fact, in my opinion, and I think the Marxist Unity Group would agree regarding the allegedly inclusive broader Workers' Party, at least, these folks would continue to exemplify the same left-wing Democratic Party sensibility they had before. In my opinion, all that would be achieved is a narrowing of their sphere of influence. Partyists, like the Marxist Unity Group, try to generate a genuine revolutionary party by basing the party on a genuinely revolutionary program. Putting forward a however revolutionary platform can help compensate leftist psyches for the lack of revolutionary subjectivity in the working class, but it won't in itself transform that subjectivity. I think that everybody would admit that and acknowledge that more has to be done, to reconstitute the desired subjectivity. But no one, in my opinion, neither myself, nor the Marxist Unity Group, nor even, dare I say, Platypus, has a useful notion of what additionally can be done to this end. I would like to close with a little bit of self-criticism. You might think it's about time. In his essay, What is Orthodox Marxism?, Lukács criticized those he labels the opportunists of his time for substituting the actual empirically given consciousness of the working class for true class consciousness. Full disclosure, I would actually defend that opportunist method. I think that true class consciousness, as opposed to empirically given class consciousness, can act as a fetish in itself. The Lukács who wrote this essay would indeed regard me, obviously, and my ilk, as outright opportunists. But I should also acknowledge that it's actually gotten worse with us opportunists. Some progressives tend, in my opinion, to substitute the positions of institutions they support, such as in my case unions, but also workers' centers, other community organizations, women's, LGBTQA organizations, racial justice organizations, etc., for the consciousness of the people those organizations represent. That can also be an evasion of the reality on the ground. What, as a greater mind than mine once asked, is to be done? A great deal of organizing and activism, to be sure, but also a great deal of sober analysis about what the nature of today's status quo is, what contradictions within it can be leveraged for radical change, what are the demographic groups that have the potential to enable emancipation, and how may they be won for emancipatory politics? What type of political organization will be most helpful to enable the emancipatory process? For the analysis to be sober, we need to eschew shibboleths and conceptual fetishes that obscure reality. For example, I think the idea of the Revolutionary Party is a lure we should avoid. Thank you.
Well, I'd like to thank Jack Calder and the Platypus Association for the invitation to speak on what kind of political party is needed, not for the left, but for the working class. And with your leave, I'd like to begin by referring to this book, The Turn to Industry, Forging a Proletarian Party by Jack Barnes, the National Secretary of the Socialist Workers' Party. And in the introduction, he explains that this book and the course that it entails is about the working class program, composition, and course of conduct of the only kind of party worthy of the name revolutionary in the imperialist epoch. The only kind of party that can recognise the most revolutionary fact of this epoch, the worth of working people and our power to change society when we organise and act against the capitalists and all the forms of their rule. This book is about building such a party in the United States and in other capitalist countries around the world. It's about the course the Socialist Workers' Party and its predecessors have followed for 100 years and counting. And I wanted to quote from a 1938 resolution of the party when it first took the name. It had already been in existence for 10 years before that, and its roots go back really to Marx and Engels, then Lenin and the Russian Revolution. But it says, "We will not succeed in rooting the party in the working class, much less in defending the revolutionary proletarian principles of the party from being undermined, unless the party is an overwhelmingly proletarian party, composed in its decisive majority of workers in the factories, mines and mills, an inseparable part of the trade unions and their struggles." And it notes that that orientation, which was the course of the Bolsheviks under V.I. Lenin in leading the workers and peasants to power in October 1917, has been our strategic course since the Communist Party was founded in the United States 2 years later, among others affiliating to the new Communist International. The new party had one sole aim: emulating the Bolsheviks' example. The SWP is a direct descendant of that party. And I appreciate the discussion that's gone on here has given me a new and deeper appreciation of all the currents and cross currents that I'm just coming to grips with as a relative newcomer to this country. But on the question of Marxism, I think there's something that's very important. And to begin with, on the question of the unions, the necessity and opportunities for working people, non-union and union alike, to be bold, to organise ourselves and to mobilise mutual solidarity have seldom been greater. And necessity is pushing us in that direction. The measure of our success will often not initially be the formation of new and powerful unions. There will be the experience and confidence workers gain as we act together. This is something that Marx and Engels emphasised in the Communist Manifesto. But there's something else associated with the founding document of the International Communist Workers' Movement that Marx and Engels wrote together. Engels, in collaboration with Marx, wrote a polemic against a certain Herr Heinzen, who history deserves to forget. But Engels said that in relation to what he said that Herr Heinzen is very much mistaken. Communism is not a doctrine, but a movement. It proceeds not from principles, but from facts. That's where the Proletarian Party's program comes from. And others have mentioned parts of the Communist Manifesto as well, but this is important. The theoretical conclusions of the communists are in no way based on ideas or principles that have been invented or discovered by this or that would-be universal reformer. They merely express, in general terms, actual relations springing from an existing class struggle, and there is an existing class struggle today that I'll come to, from a historical movement going on under our very eyes. Marxism is simply, if you can say that, the generalised interests written down of one of the two major classes involved in that struggle in the modern world, the working class. And Marxists are very much part of the working class, not something outside it. The Revolutionary Marxist Party analyses all classes and their conflicts, all politics, from the point of view of the historic goals of our class, the class we are simply the most conscious and organised part of and the most consistent fighter for. And others have already quoted other aspects of that. And I agree, by the way, that what Anthony said about this is perhaps the greatest crisis of the rulers in this country historically ever, and that what happens in this country is of world historic importance. On that point, I totally agree. And this discussion has also led me to understand in a deeper way why we say in the Socialist Workers' Party that the most important issue in the class struggle today is the way that the Democratic Party administration is wielding Washington's political police, the FBI, to ride roughshod over the liberties protected under the US Constitution that working people have fought for over centuries, that come out of the first American Revolution, the War of Independence, the plebeian struggle afterwards, Shays' Rebellion that led to the amendments that went into the Bill of Rights, the Second American Revolution, the Civil War, the Reconstruction afterwards, the fact that you had majority black, proletarian-led popular governments in the South that were embraced by the poor white workers as much as by the freed black slaves. This is a pointer to the future. This is the answer to the wokeism and the identity politics, and this is a course for the working class. Okay, what are those? And I should also say the black proletarian-led civil rights movement that was a kind of a social revolution in this country. We don't need to debate about terms, but look at what it achieved. And Tony said this also, that the working class today is far less racist than it was 60 years ago. There are not lynch mobs today. As a newcomer to the country, I can appreciate this deeply. The freedoms of speech, of assembly, of association, of worship, and against unreasonable search and seizure are very important for the kind of working class organisations, the unions, political parties that need to be put together. We condemn the heavily armed FBI raid on former President Donald Trump's Florida residence. If they can get away with that, with a bourgeois opponent, a former president, what is to stop them riding completely roughshod over ordinary working class unionists and fighters? Regardless of who those state forces go after today, this is part of preparation for going after the working class in the upheavals to come.
I'm giving you a 2-minute warning, Roy.
Wow.
Good stuff.
That's all right, I'm going to have to ditch most of this. We stand with the deplorables. We stand with the so-called semi-fascists. If that's what we are, this is the most powerful political party of the most powerful ruling class in history, wielding the political police, and claiming that the workers are going after a semi-fascist. I'm sorry, it's repugnant, as you said. Okay, there's class struggle going on. 115,000 rail workers have been discussing going out on strike. So the Biden administration intervenes to make sure there's no strike until after the elections, and preferably not ever, even though 3 rail workers have been killed in the last 6 weeks. Even though the onerous attendance policies, longer and longer trains, one-person crews on trains, the horrendous dangers of this. Okay. Bakery workers are out on strike at Corn Nuts in California. United Auto Workers members are on strike at Case, New Holland, and Iowa and Wisconsin. If you want to know where the class struggle is today, take some solidarity to these battles. Come with the Socialist Workers' Party. Engage in the fight. And I just want to close on this, since I've jettisoning all in the middle of my talk. There have been 2 great revolutions in the 20th century, the Russian Revolution and the Cuban Revolution. The example of the Cuban Revolution and the way that Fidel Castro, the rebel army and July 26 movement leaders, others, the way they fused and led millions to participate in a deepening revolution, forging a workers' and farmers' government and deepening into a socialist revolution. Our aim is to do what they did here. And I just want to, one point and then closing. The threat of nuclear weapons today. What's the answer to that? We say and act on the conviction that only socialist revolutions in the imperialist countries can bring the danger of a nuclear world conflagration to an end once and for all. What other way is there but disarming the nuclear war makers? No propertied ruling class is going to disarm only to risk its own wealth and power while its competitors and enemies remain nuclear armed to the teeth. Think about it. The stakes are enormous. Working people are beginning to see this and need to see the necessity and grasp the opportunity when it comes to take political power in our own hands. We just need a leadership like the Cuban Revolution. The Socialist Workers' Party is forging a proletarian party in the United States, a revolutionary political instrument of the working class, whose program, composition, and course of conduct are consistent with our purpose. That aim, as our Constitution says, is to educate and organise the working class in order to establish a workers' and farmers' government which will abolish capitalism in the United States and join in the worldwide struggle for socialism. Thank you.
All right. Before we get to our Q&A section, I would like to give each of the panelists 2 minutes to respond to the other panelists' opening remarks, starting with Shuvu.
Yeah, I think, definitely a lot to take in from all the panelists, and I guess thank you for your contributions. I do think the one thing that is missing in all of this is, we have to deal with the fact that, we're not in, 1917 anymore. Things have changed drastically. The methods of struggle have changed drastically. And one thing that we need to contend with is what do we do about rupture? Okay, since the 2008 crisis, I think the working class has fought back in really novel ways. I mean, we can look at Occupy, which was basically, like unemployed workers, for the most part, took over parks and set up democratic assemblies, and that spread like wildfire, and then eventually was crushed. And then we can also look at, for example, like the West Virginia teachers strike. It happened outside of the workers. It happened outside of like the traditional trade unions, and it was workers organizing on social media to lead something spontaneous, you know. And recently, of course, like the George Floyd protests. And I think I'm bringing this up because we had a few panelists saying that like right now is not the moment to form a party. You know, folks are like the working class just hasn't gone through the fire enough. And I think that like a large, you know, like the working class has gone through a lot of fires since 08. And also right now, like the emerging militancy led by young workers in the trade union movement, like the Amazon labor union struggle, and in Starbucks Workers United. I mean, this is indication that like something is like changing, and I think the need for a party is again to try to link these struggles up and to generalize them. And I did also like point to the DSA because for all of its faults, I mean, this is like the largest socialist organization in the country. There are revolutionary elements within it, as can be seen with, you know, the Marxist Unity Group. So I think I did get the sense that among some panelists that it was sort of just like we should just wait and kind of see how things go. And I don't believe in that. I think that if we look at the George Floyd protests, had the DSA put Cater on the ground, had we had a plan, then we might have actually formed something larger and more permanent out of it. And yeah, I think now's the time. If we look at the railroad workers struggling, if we look at the emerging like trade union movement struggles there, the growing cost of living crisis, there is something that can be tapped into, and there exist organizations like the DSA with the forces necessary to like push for a united front to bring these movements together. So I guess that was my main, I guess, point. So yeah.
All right. So, you know, this is the deal with the left right now is, you know, you've got all these different groups. You've got one large group, or fairly relative to some of the smaller groups, and they're all going to the people. They're all going into the unions, trying to organizing tenant unions, protests, whatever. And I don't think the problem with the left today is not that we're not doing the work, we're not doing the activism. Because I do think if you look at what all these different leftists are doing today, they're all going to the workers, they're all organizing, they're all doing this stuff. The problem is that they're all doing it in competition with one another. And none of these existing groups, none of these Trotskyist or ML or Maoist groups are going to be able to become a revolutionary party simply by recruiting one person at a time or 10 people at a time until they eventually become big enough to actually be a real party. And so I understand, you know, Anthony's concern that, you know, well, you know, if we just declared ourselves the party and made a website and had some people around the country, it really wouldn't change anything. And I do agree with that, which is partly why I reject what I call this kind of fusionist approach, which is that we just need to kind of go to the people and act as cadres, because I think that's necessary. We need to be embedded in the struggles of the working class and the democratic struggles for, you know, democratic freedoms. But that alone is not enough, because it doesn't mean that there's going to be a larger coordinating body that can actually fully realize the potential of these struggles. I think that that's the big problem, I think, is, and you know, my argument is that instead of ignoring the left and going straight to the workers, we have to work within the left. We have to engage the entire left in dialogue, political dialogue, and put forward the challenge of synthesizing our forces and uniting around a program. And I think that as long as we are stuck with these various fixations on theoretical purity and theoretical unity, we're not going to be able to actually move beyond the existing composition of the left towards something that could actually be a party that is merging with the working class and actually growing into a force that could take responsibility for society and the governance of society. Because ultimately, that is why a party is necessary. You can have all of the spontaneous rebellions and all of the, the violent insurrectionary, general strike, whatever, but without a organized body that can govern, that can take responsibility for society, that has a vision for transforming society, it will all just amount to the increasing fragmentation and breakdown of society that we're seeing today. And it is really frustrating seeing all the energy and all the potential of the George Floyd movement become essentially channeled into voting for Joe Biden. But I think as long as our activity in the left is not organized around a telos of building the party, that's going to be the continuing trajectory. And so I would argue is like the question is not, how do we declare ourselves a party right now and formally create one, but how do we coalesce the existing forces of the left into the direction of a revolutionary party?
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. I think our discussion indicates what the problem is, rather than indicating a solution to the problem. Often, and I'm probably not talking about anybody on this panel, people who call most loudly for a revolutionary political party have the least connections to the masses of people that the political party should represent. At least that's been my experience. It kind of becomes a substitute for actual engagement with people. In other words, rather than a top-down call for a political party, what about a bottom-up discussion with the working class and others about what the conditions and the objectives of struggle would be? Thus far, no one has talked about their or their organization's involvement with ordinary people. Let me give you an example. I'm from Philadelphia. Philadelphia, among the top 10 largest cities, is the poorest. We have an open-air drug market in a part of the city called Kensington. Philadelphia is a hugely violent city. Now, if one goes to the people, one sees a different reality from the bottom up than you see from the top down. And the narratives would be more like Mrs. So-and-so who works in so-and-so factory is concerned about her son who goes to a school in a community where there are guns. And Mr. So-and-so, who is unemployed, is concerned about his family and the fact that they are about to lose their home to gentrification and taxes and so on. My point is, and this is the point I was making about those who are calling for a revolutionary party do not have at this moment the necessary experience with the people that would allow them to make a judgment politically about such a very important question as the forming of a communist or revolutionary party. The other thing is, any claim that we are limited in terms of what we can do until we have a political party is a form of abandoning the people. You know, a lot of people say, well, you know, our problem is we don't have a political party, a revolutionary political party, therefore we cannot do X, Y, and Z. My argument is, if you are politically sophisticated, connected to the masses, ideologically clear, none of these are absolutes, of course, there is a whole lot that you can do. For example, again, I'm from Philadelphia, so I don't know where what cities people are from. For me, Philadelphia presents such wide possibilities for struggle, for advancing unity of the people, for raising the consciousness of the people. My last point. The question of racism, which is the major ideological force dividing the people and the working class. In the earlier panel, I tried to make a logical argument. I don't know if it makes all the sense in the world, makes a lot of sense to me. That the black proletariat in its being represents the proletariat in its becoming. The black proletariat, to know the black proletariat, is literally to see the future of the working class as a whole. The black proletariat is what the proletariat must become. Racism divides the working class. We agree to that. What part of the proletariat is least racist or anti-racist? What part of the proletariat has, from the beginning, been involved in intense battles with the ruling class, whatever form it has taken, in the fight for its survival, and can and does impart to the working class as a whole what it must become. My last point is that tactics are not separated from these philosophical and theoretical questions, which we must work out. And in fact, maybe I'll make a proposal that Platypus call us all together again, and there be one issue on the table, a party or a movement, and where we are in the revolutionary process in this country. Last point.
Is this your last point,
Tony?
Tony?
I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's 3 in a row.
I'm following in his footsteps.
No.
I love all my panelists, friends, although we never met. But, oh God, no, we met before, but I never met them, man. But my last point is, what is the capacity of the working people at this stage? What is their capacity? Are they capable now of supporting a revolutionary communist party, or is their capacity in a deepening and widening struggle against a ruling class that they all agree is illegitimate? And how do we draw upon that? How do we become a part of that energy? And how do we get the necessary experience to form the advanced forms of organization necessary for the democratic seizure of power?
A couple of points. I think that the claim isn't that the working class hasn't gone through the fire of sort of suffering and oppression.
Can I just say,
Yes,
I
please.
did not mean the working class. I'm saying those cadre.
Right.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Okay.
I'm actually not disagreeing with you.
Okay, yeah, because I thought I was misunderstood.
No problem.
I'm sorry, Jim.
No worries. I think that the problem is, has the working class developed, or has it shown signs of developing a revolutionary subjectivity that would basically correspond to the formation of a revolutionary party? And I would argue no. I think that, as a labor organizer, I'm incredibly excited by all the organizing at Amazon, and there have been Starbucks strikes in Boston. I don't know if you've had similar here or not. All the new worker organizing is absolutely wonderful. I'm a little embarrassed that it's outside the official labor movement, but that's my own problem. I think it's wonderful. I'm actually way more pro and happy about the Black Lives Matter movement than many people in Platypus, I think. But neither of these are revolutionary. Sort of like they both address profound human issues and are extraordinarily valuable as a result of that, in my opinion. But they don't have I don't think they show any signs of leading to revolutionary consciousness. And I'll take the historical example of the Chartists, which, I grew up, you can tell from my accent, I grew up in England. And so sort of like the Chartists are just sort of, like Paddington Bear. They're just sort of like, the basis of who we are. But Chartism did not lead to revolutionary politics. Chartism led to laborism. And I don't think there is any evidence that it really actually had the potential to do anything else. So I think that there's the question is, with respect to the consciousness of black workers, and this is where we will come to the difference between empirical consciousness and true class consciousness. My union AFSCME is more tied to the Democratic Party than you could ever possibly imagine, right? Well, we can debate that.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
But the reason for that, or part of the reason for that, I shouldn't say the reason, part of the reason is that black working class women in particular are especially committed to the Democratic Party. And that aspect. I mean, we talked about, somebody yesterday basically talked about how the Bernie Sanders campaign nearly made it, and it was just sort of cut off in South Carolina. We should remember how that happened. What happened is that Sam Clyburn sort of basically did not want Bernie Sanders to win, and he was seen as the kingmaker to basically establish who was the non-Sanders candidate, and he chose Joe Biden. And blacks in South Carolina, black Democrats in South Carolina, put Joe Biden in, and basically the white suburban Democrats afterwards basically followed the line. So people on the left are basically saying we should be following black leadership. Well, the reality is that all the white suburbanites who voted for Joe Biden in the primaries after South Carolina were following black leadership. And I think that the movements are not necessarily revolutionary. I mean, I love movements, and I'm not particularly revolutionary. And it's really important to basically soberly analyze what the potential and the reality of these different movements are. Sorry,
Okay, it's okay.
I'll try and be quick since I think I overstepped the mark before. But I just wanted to refer back to another piece in the introduction to this book about the workers that are most open to acting today against the employers and to giving consideration to working class political alternatives are exactly those that the capitalist ruling families and the professional and upper middle class layers dismiss as deplorables or trash. They're actually a better class of people, and we consider ourselves part of them. These are men and women of all skin colours and ages. They and their kin come from urban and rural backgrounds, from all continents and national origins. It's amongst these deplorables that a disciplined and fighting union vanguard of the working class will be steeled and forged over time. And I just want to say, one thing that struck me is there can be a certain impatience that the working class is not living up to the prognostications of various academics or philosophers. The working class exists and it fights in skirmishes today, big class battles tomorrow. And during the period of reaction between the 1905 revolution and the 1917 revolution in Russia, the Bolsheviks had to withstand that whole period of reaction, and I'm sure there were voices saying that working class, right off the working class, they're no good, they're part of the reaction. And then you had the explosion of the imperialist war, the betrayals of most of the Second International parties. The Bolsheviks and other internationalists stood alone. The Bolsheviks said turn the imperialist war into a civil war. Women protested on International Women's Day and the February Revolution erupted. And there were periods when the workers were out in front of the Bolsheviks, when the Bolsheviks had to run to catch up. And there were other periods like the July days when they had to restrain sections of the working class that wanted to run ahead of the working class as a whole. The same thing happened with a leader of our movement. Before Jack Barnes, the National Secretary of the Socialist Workers' Party, was Farrell Dobbs. Some of you may have heard of him. He was a young militant that became one of the outstanding leaders of the Teamsters Union, working with others in the ranks, in the lower echelons of officials, right through to the international leadership before the US rulers' drive to World War II. One of the thing that he said was the hardest thing he ever had to do in his life was in one of these clashes with the bosses and the strike breakers, where some of the strike breakers came with guns, and he had to disarm them because that would have been the worst thing. It would have to respond to the provocations, and it would have just given an excuse for the police and the troops to go after on a different level. It requires disciplined leadership. That's what we have to learn today, and we have to be patient, not be impatient with the workers that aren't living up to a certain standard, but to be with them, part of the struggles, and that's the way to earn the right to say you're part of the vanguard. There is no self-proclaimed vanguard, only what you do and act along a certain course. Thank you.
All right, I'd like to shift to our Q&A section now. Okay, I already see some hands. Right here. Oh. Is there a mic?
Just two things. One is a question, and I'll ask it second. The first is just being, not mischievous really, but sort of just probing something. If there were one other person, I've got something out of every presentation, and thank you very much for all of them. If one person got up and said, I'm interested in starting such a party, and I'm interested in starting with the people in this room, and let's start with you and go down and just get like 3 sentences from each person about their thoughts about how to form it, what would it look like, how do we get from here to there, and start taking that kind. In other words, start the party now and solve the problems as they come up, because they identify themselves as problems as you try to move to the next square. There's something to be said for that. I know it's not the end solution, but maybe there should be a track where that's going on too. So by the time we get to the point where, okay, the working class is ready for a vanguard party, let's start one. There's already all kinds of stuff there. I mean, I know we're all doing sort of moving towards that in our own lives, in our own work, whether we know it or not. But maybe if there was a conscious like stream going on, also working towards that, it might be, we might find it useful later. That's just one thing. The question I have is trying to identify what exactly does it mean. Number one, what is power actually? How do we envision it? Okay, and this is something that Tony knows I've been working on this lately, and I'm kind of fixated on the question. And secondly, once identifying at least the 4 corners of it or some silhouette of it, what does it mean actually for the working class to seize power? Like the entire class, a vanguard party, something else? And what's the active seizure? I mean, we saw what has happened in history, and we saw what became of each of these things, or is still becoming of them. But what's our vision of this? As we start saying we want to do this, do what? What exactly? And I think we could benefit from trying to describe these things. Anyway, for anybody.
Yeah, just down the line, feel free to respond.
I mean, here's an idea. Let's, start a mass movement for a new constitution. I think, Daniel Lazare over here, he has a very good analysis of the anti-democratic nature of the U.S. Constitution. So, maybe, one of the demands that we could use to mobilize broad masses of workers would be for a mass assembly, a constituent assembly of some kind, to draft a new constitution that truly represents the democratic will of the people. I think there is a role just for movements, but I think that for such a movement to go somewhere progressive, it does have to have the Marxist leadership, and we're still in the process of forming that leadership. We're forming the connections. We're trying to unite different Marxists, but that's just an idea. I think the issue of the Constitution, in my opinion, is extremely important, and it puts the question of class rule in democracy on the table. So that's just an idea.
Maybe we could try. Somebody used the word Soviet earlier today. Soviet, for most, I don't know how many people know, it's actually a Russian word for workers' council.
Right.
And it's just groups of workers. And so we actually did what I suggested, only with workers everywhere.
Well, another idea would be like doing like neighborhood-based organizing, like finding the proletarian neighborhoods in your city and doing district-based organizing, stuff like that. I think there's an idea that the working class only exists at the point of production, but the working class it exists in neighborhoods, it exists in regional areas, and I think we do need to look beyond we do need to be going into the unions and contesting them and engaging in these new struggles, but we also need to be organizing at the district level.
Well, I want to speak about the experience of the two revolutions in the 20th century. The Bolsheviks actually won a majority in the Soviets. There was a period when they proposed to the Mensheviks that it'd be that they fight it out on the propaganda level, that there was an opening to have a peaceful taking of power based on who had the majority in the Soviets. But the Mensheviks sided with the counter-revolution, and one of them, the trigger of that was when they tried to shut down the Bolshevik press, and the outrage swept through, and there was an instrument to take the political power, which was the Bolshevik Party, but they had immense backing from within the Soviets, and so hence you have the mythology of the counter-revolutionary, the bourgeois historians who all say it was a Bolshevik coup. It was nothing of the sort. It was a tremendously peaceful taking of power, by millions through their instrument of the Bolshevik Party. In the Cuban Revolution, you had the myth that it was 12 armed men in the Sierra Maestra. There was a huge underground movement in the cities. The rebel army took on the Batista Army's forces. They treated the soldiers well when they captured them. They deprived them of their weapons, but not their uniforms or their dignity. There's a real lesson here for how to conduct a revolutionary war. They released them back to the Red Cross. They shared their food and medicine, etc. But the main thing was that when it came to the crunch and the sections of the Batista Army went over to the revolutionary forces inside the prisons and surrendering. But one of the generals that Fidel had been talking to, who said that they were going to turn over the power, once they got Batista on a plane, they tried to carry out a coup. And Fidel said, they want these on the phone, do you want to talk to him? Fidel said, we've got nothing to talk about, we won. And he sent Che Guevara and Camilo Cienfuegos to the centers of power of the fortresses in Havana, and he began the triumphal procession up the island, which he thought was going to take a day or two. But everybody came out and wanted to meet the men of Moncada, who had laid their lives on the line, who were willing to sacrifice everything. They knew that they could trust these people. And Fidel said, we will only see such an outpouring again if we are true to everything that we have committed to so far after we die. And that actually is what happened. That when Fidel died, there was a bigger outpouring. But the thing was that as they came out, Fidel looked at all those in his movement that had the July 26th black and red insignia, and then he said, but something bigger was going on. There was all the ordinary working men and women in their everyday clothes, and that was the uniform of the revolution coming into being. And that's always the challenge with a revolutionary party when it advances to take the power and then not turn in on itself, become a sectarian formation or a bureaucracy, but to continually, constantly deepen amongst the workers and working farmers and all the exploited. That is the solution.
Panelists, feel free to respond to the comments.
Yeah, I think that we should just look like, what have the working people in the United States, since the crisis, what are the tactics that they've come up with independently to try to push forward change? And I think one thing that really comes up is the tactic of occupation. And I think it's the first occupation started in Wisconsin when workers had occupied the state capitol to try to push back on this law which would dismantle union rights. And in that moment, they were able to unite various different sections of the working class together. And I think that there's a lesson to really learn from that. And I do agree with what Donald had said about taking the lessons of Chartism. One thing from Chartism which really strikes out to me is the fact that The Chartist movement started. It created the first workers' party in the world during a time when trade union density for them was like really low. The working class was largely disorganized, and in a really short period of time, the Chartist movement was able to get like 1.5 million signatures in support of the basic demands. What did they do? How did it start? It was a militant minority of a few worker groups. They decided on a few demands. They went to every locality, they had a rally, and they got people together to sign the petitions and get involved with the Chartist movement. There's something that I'd read when looking upon like a history of it by, I think it was like Dorothy something. But anyways, so in this book, there's a quote by a worker saying that like before we had little sects here and there, but because of the Chartist movement, all of our sects kind of became united into this organization, right? I think that something that is plausible, that can be done not in the distant future, but immediately in this year or so, is why not try to build a militant minority of the Amazon labor union, Starbucks workers who like are at the forefront right now, build a united front organization, and it's based around immediate demands that like resonate with working people. I think for the working people, democracy is not an end in itself, it's a means to an end. And people are really suffering right now. Like there's a huge cost of living crisis going on. There's a threat of climate change, there's a threat of world war. Like if we had a demand-based movement calling for an end to war, tax cuts on the rich, Medicare for all, just basic things, and it would be backed with the pledge to do a general strike. And then what we do in tactic-wise is occupy. We go to every city hall, and we kind of call for these demands and like bring people together. I think we could have the basis of like a large like general strike organization. I think movement-wise, that's something which needs to be done. We need to like think strategically about right now, how do we bring the forces together? What are the demands that would like bring different sections of the working class together? That's something that was missing from the George Floyd protests as well. It was, like the movement was to end police brutality, but there was no presence there which could have expanded to maybe fight for economic justice as well, and bring in sections of rank and file workers and unions. So I think that in terms of like building a mass, I think there's a difference between a socialist party, a mass socialist party, and a mass workers organization. I think those are two different, they're related, but they're two different tasks. And I think right now, as just a means of immediate defense, we should be calling for and organizing for some sort of a united front movement like what I'd outlined. So yeah, that's some of my thoughts on that.
I just wanted to say something. Unlike I think many other people in this room and other people on this panel, am actually genuinely terrified of Donald Trump, and I just don't want to go into the argument back and forth because that's not part of our topic, but it is a real issue for people like me in the labor movement that there are not necessarily a majority, but there are a significant number of our beloved and crucial brothers and sisters in the unions who are supporting Trump. And sort of liberals and the left, and I think they both actually have the same problem in this regard, need to find a way to basically talk that is not condescending, that is not that does not exude sort of a sense of cultural superiority. I'm very struck by what Anthony said at a previous panel about wokeism, about being woke. So, like, there is nothing wrong, and there's a lot that's good about being concerned about sexual harassment, about being concerned about racism, about being concerned about transphobia, and so forth. What is wrong is when you articulating your position on that comes across as cultural capital, to quote Bourdieu, when basically it's a symbol of your superiority. And I actually developed an understanding when I went back to England this summer, and I actually developed an empathy with Trump voters, which I had never had before.
Tom, I apologize. I'd like to take a few questions. Yeah. No, go ahead and finish what you were saying. Yeah.
So like basically, I went back to London. I actually didn't come from London. I went back to London, and all these people, and I felt like a sort of rube. Not only had I become American, but I was from Boston, and there were all these people who sort of like London has become this big cultural center, and there are all these folks who are sort of like big in the theater world now, and were oh so Marxist, I felt a sort of cultural resentment that I was being made to feel inferior by that experience. And perhaps it's a sign of my privilege that I've never had that experience before. And it was an interesting experience, and it actually made, I think, me understand. I mean, obviously people are different and people's circumstances. Part of the process by which people are alienated from the left, from liberals, from progressives, and something that we need to address, and we need to address it practically. So, like, it's very easy to say we've got to basically talk in a way that doesn't make people feel inferior, but I'm not sure that any of the people on the left, or the liberals, or other progressives are necessarily that good at that at the moment. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Hi. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, is the microphone working?
I think it's on.
Oh, okay.
We're on. So, as each of you were going through your presentations and your next comments, I'm listening to the details, but I'm also trying to simplify it down for myself. Like Revolutionary Party, yes or no, right? For each of you. I think I got like maybe 2 yeses, and then like between 1 and 3 no's, or 1 and 3 maybes. That's my count. I think each one of you might have a different tally on that. I don't know. There might be differences in the way that each of you would size up each other. The question that occurred to me is like, how does intellectual relationship or a political commitment to the dictatorship of the proletariat relate to that? So I was curious, is it like a one-to-one mapping among the differences among you on the panel? Like, do the, like, that simple layer of like Revolutionary Party, yes or no, would that map perfectly onto like dictatorship of the proletariat, yes or no, on any time horizon? Not now, but at any point in the future. Does like a yes or no, or a maybe, or whatever response to the dictatorship of the proletariat question correspond consistently to an answer to Revolutionary Party for the left? And I'm kind of curious what each, not that everyone needs to respond, but I'm curious what any one of your expectations would be for what you're thinking, but then for what other people are thinking on the panel in advance of like actually everyone like going and giving another talk on the dictatorship of the proletariat. What would you expect people to think about it based on everything that's already been said about political party? Hope that's clear.
I think it's a hypothetical question that does not get us any closer to an answer. And the question on the table is, I think, what would a party of the left look like, or is a party of the left immediately necessary, and if so, how do we go about forming it? If not, then what is to be done? So I think we have to stay in touch with reality rather than hypothesizing about the matter. I think it's not helpful to do it in that way. Again, I would say we have to consider not the question as you put it, but the capacity of working people and the capacity of socialists and revolutionaries to form such a party now. And if neither side is at the level to either form or to follow such a party, I think we have to then say, what do we do now? This is not, I don't think it's a hypothetical question. I think it's a question that carries tremendous consequence. And if we do not handle it properly, people like ourselves will dissipate our revolutionary energy and become further removed from the great mass of working people.
I don't think it's hypothetical.
Tell me why you don't think it's hypothetical. Well, you ask us, no, if you don't mind, I don't mean to be combative, but you see, you ask the question, does one's opinion on the dictatorship of the proletariat correlate with one's position on a party, a revolutionary party, right? I think that's, I would say it's a hypothetical question because it does not relate to the question at hand, the problem at hand. Well, let's put it in real terms. The profound and historic political crisis of the nation and frankly of the ruling class. We are no closer, I don't think the question of the dictatorship of the proletariat is a question that is before us at this time. And so to put that in a forum like this one, where the question is what kind of party or a party itself, I think it's hypothetical. I mean,
Can I just suggest we take a few questions from the audience?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Really good to hear more from the audience.
Yeah.
But I don't need to.
My question, I think, is pretty simple. I wanted to know, what is the purpose of a party? What does it exist to do? And yeah, I think maybe people have been suggesting actually different purposes, that it might be a tool for taking state power, or else that it's supposed to represent the proletariat. So I would appreciate if there could be kind of a more direct discussion of that question. And Ethan, if I need to give this microphone to somebody, just let me know.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I think the question of the party ultimately comes down to this. Like, a class currently is taking the responsibility for society. That class is the capitalist class. It's running society into the ground. And so the question is, who can take responsibility instead? And that raises the question of the dictatorship of the proletariat. And so, in my opinion, the point of the party is to organize the forces, to marshal the forces that can make an alternative to the rule of the bourgeois through the rule of the proletariat possible. So I guess like the purpose of a party is to organize the proletariat into a force that can govern and take responsibility for society, that can actually convince the masses of people that the proletariat is a class that is capable of governing. And I think that part of the purpose of a party is almost in a way to prefigure what proletarian governance looks like in its own institutions and its own practice, and through coming together politically, uniting the class around political goals, and organizing the alternative culture, organizing the the leadership of the economic struggles The proletariat is trained to become a class that can govern and has the institutions that allow it to govern.
You can feel free to respond, but then get to the next question.
I think it depends very much upon whether you're talking about what's the point of a Marxist party, and what would be the point of a party from my point of view. From the point of view of Marxism, I think the point of the party is to incarnate the revolutionary subjectivity of the proletariat, and that may that at appropriate times will involve taking state power, and others doing something different. I think that my conception of the political party is basically as a kind of general society-wide trade union representing working people's interests within society, and basically a sort of kind of trade union writ large. Hopefully a really inclusive trade union writ large. And that's, of course, not revolutionary and not Marxist.
Go ahead.
One of the things that makes it difficult to have this discussion is that it's been a while since there's been a revolutionary struggle, and the understanding of the revolutionary leaderships that made that possible. I mean, enough has been mentioned about Russia, Cuba, but it's been, 30, 40 years? The last giant, massive struggle, revolutionary struggle, was against apartheid in South Africa. You have the Nicaraguan Revolution in 1979, Grenada Revolution. What went into putting those kind of leaderships together, the New Jewel movement, the Sandinista Front, the ANC, it's like the course of conduct, the program that was put together, the experience that steals this leadership, it's like to be able to put themselves at the front of those struggles. It's been a while. Just like it's been a while since we've seen giant labor struggles in this country, where labor and social struggles in these countries, where you have seen the beginnings of independent working class political formations or of those characters. The question of a labor party, it's got to be posed. But we've seen examples in this country, in the class struggle in this country, in independent political formations, it's like coming out of the Black rights movement, coming out of the labor movement. We've seen incipient, but the question is posed. So that's one thing. I very much like this thing on being deeply rooted in the working class. It was unthinkable that you would hear Lenin thinking about being linked with the working class or connected with. I mean, it had to be submerged into the working class. And the examples that you've been giving, it's like on how we need to begin to address the condition that the working class is facing. It's like you can't. It's like you mentioned the question of crime. It's like how much disconnected can you be when you begin to raise the questions of defund the police? You can't address the question of a woman's right to choose, it's like women's emancipation, without addressing the condition of working class families. It's like what's happened there. It's what allowed Trump to speak of the carnage demagogically. It's like to speak of that. What has happened in the working class in the last 30 years? And the concrete demands, those conditions pose the question of the concrete demands that the labor movement has to take up. The labor movement has to take this thing up. It is out of those struggles. I mean, the thing on the rail workers, it has resonance because it has to do with the conditions that is happening throughout the working class. The work schedules that makes it impossible to have a family life. It's like the inability of young people to be able to start their own families because you can't afford it. I mean, these are very concrete questions that the labor movement has got to take up, and it's through struggle of the labor movement that we're going to be able to rebuild the labor movement and lay the basis for the formation of a party of the working class. It is through that. Nothing else. And it can't be done from the outside. It can't be, it's like it's going to have to be through that. It's like there's a lot of stuff, it's like on these questions on the experiences of occupied and all of that. There is no way to bypass that. It's like the labor, the unions are our basic organizations, and unless we transform them, we're doomed. We are doomed. That can only be done as part of it. As part of it.
Yeah. Panelists, feel free to respond quickly to that. Oh. Okay.
Yeah, I think it was Donald who described the left as sort of one big organization and then lots of little organizations. I wonder if we could be a little bit more clear about this. There's the Democratic Party and the remnants of sects. And the DSA is a part of the Democratic Party. When we first did this panel in 2015, I think, there were a lot of people talking about the party question. And it had been posed in Greece, in Spain, etc. It was posed in some ways by Occupy. I mean, it is certainly the case that the millennial left, broadly speaking, has been disgusted with the sectarian organizations or the ostensibly revolutionary organizations that were inherited from the 1960s and hasn't joined them, right? That's very clear, that they haven't been intergenerationally reproduced, at least not even on the scale that my generation did that. And my generation really never provided leadership for those older sectarian organizations. And so I think we have to confront the fact that the party question, as it was posed in the last generation, was resolved through the Sanders campaigns. And after the election of Trump, the mass entrance of young people into the DSA. And we can't deny that this has been a massive miseducation of the working class and demobilization of the working class. I mean, Mr. Batta talked about occupation, but he never talked about January 6th. January 6th was an occupation of the Congress no less surely than the occupation of the Wisconsin State House. Looked a lot like it, actually. Right? But the default assumption is that we're Democrats. And so that connection's not made. Right? It has to, the idea is that, I think Tom talked about leftists and liberals versus the right taking up discontent. We cannot identify the Democratic Party as the comrade from the SWP rightly pointed out. This is the oldest capitalist party in the world. It is the dominant party of the leading power in global capitalism. It is the political bastion of the capitalist state globally. And we're talking about a left that has led a new generation of people into that party. Now, leads me to another thing, which is the issue of what is the party for? A lot of people have said the party is to take power. But is that really true? Is that what socialists believe? Right? Don't we believe that the working class takes power? Isn't there a difference between parties and Soviets and unions? There are many forms of working class political organization, of which the party is just one. Right? And what does Lenin talk about? Does he talk about forming a party in order to take power? No. He took power, by the way, together with the socialist revolutionaries. Like, let's not forget, right? That in the sense that there were two political parties that encouraged the working class to take power through their what? Newspapers, right? Why aren't we talking about the complete crisis of the fact that on the one hand we have the militant newspaper here, which I read, not disparaging, very limited circulation, or the Cosmonaut webpage, or Jacobin, right? Or the other publications. Like, what are the intellectuals talking about, right? Isn't the question of a party going to be about addressing, yes, properly intellectual questions amongst intellectuals that we can't, that intellectuals are never going to be able to conjure into existence a revolutionary working class. But there is a question of a real crisis of our organizations and the way that we inherit the problems of the left as intellectual tasks for people in this room, right? And it seems to me that when we're talking about like the Iskra editorial board, right, we are talking about intellectuals in a fundamental way, right? That the question was, what is the newspaper, what is the ideological intervention that we're going to make within a working class that, after all, is producing its own organizations? And I really don't see the point of talking to a bunch of super educated kids who are going to become computer programmers and doctors and lawyers about trying to generate the working class struggle. Right? The question is, are you going to become a socialist intellectual and think to the bottom of these problems? And what does the party question look like there? Right? I guess that's what I want to pose.
Somebody.
Yeah, feel free to respond.
I'll give it a shot. Yeah, there you go.
Time frame? This is the last question, so yeah. Yeah, right. Yeah, yes. Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think the question of the Russian Revolution is a bit more complicated than it's being put by Spencer here. Because, listen, yes, the Bolsheviks, they took power through the Soviets. They formed the coalition with the left SRs. They gave programmatic leadership to the Soviet movement. And they tried to form a new republic that was founded on the Soviets. And what happens is the Bolsheviks and left SRs start killing each other because there's a split over the Brest-Litovsk Treaty. The Soviets that are formed are not capable of actually coordinating the economic crisis that's happening throughout the country. Total social breakdown is happening. They have a state bureaucracy, the old Tsarist bureaucracy that they kind of hope they could bypass through the Soviets. Actually, it turns out we really do need these skills that these people have, and we really don't have the capacity to bypass this bureaucracy, despite the democratic will of the workers. And so what happens is the Bolshevik Party has to co-opt parts of the Tsarist bureaucracy, and it has to bring its own working class militants into the state bureaucracy. So in the end, it was the party that formed the regime that was formed through the Soviets. And so I think. Well, it was a retreat for sure, and I think the problem was that they didn't really understand the problem of bureaucracy and the problem of how do you actually overcome the state bureaucracy. And so when they didn't have a real answer to this, they had to fall back on the old Tsarist bureaucracy, and the Stalinist rot increases in the party. Things get worse. And so this is what I mean when I say that the party has to train the proletariat and create the institutions that can allow the proletariat to govern. Because yes, the proletariat governs, but it needs its own representatives, its own institutions, and that's where the party comes in and actually creating the institutions that can form a new government. So, is anyone?
This is the final statement?
Yes.
Do you want to go?
No, you go.
I've talked too much already, but I just wanted to answer the question that was asked but wasn't answered, which is, in my particular case, there's absolutely a one-to-one relationship between skepticism about the dictatorship of the proletariat and the party, and it's related to the sort of. It seems to me that the dictatorship of the proletariat is an incoherent notion, because if the dictatorship of the proletariat is actually going to be the dictatorship of the proletariat as such, that assumes that there is a single proletarian will that is dictating, and I don't think there's ever going to be such a thing. And that's why I'm skeptical about the dictatorship of the proletariat, and I think that is connected to reasons that I'm skeptical about the party.
Yeah, I think Donald, did go over like a lot of just the critical, like theoretical points, but I think just from a really practical perspective, like, why do you need a party, right? I think the question's answered when we can't decide when the class struggle is going to happen. We can't decide when protests and occupations are going to happen, nor can we decide when wildcat strikes are going to happen. So on a very practical level, it's just necessary to have a group of folks who have a plan when these things happen to expand and generalize and broaden the struggle. I think for that reason alone, it's necessary to build a socialist party. And right now, like Donald had said, like in the left there's one big organization and a bunch of smaller organizations. That one big organization has Democratic Party agents. That one big organization is controlled by class collaborationist elements. But that one big organization has also brought together and somehow managed to unify the revolutionary socialist left. And so it's our responsibility to actually go in there and figure out how to organize these people, right? Like, I used to be in a very ultra-left sectarian organization. I think one thing that it's part of growing up in politics is understanding that, like, to fight, you have to get your hands dirty. There's no such thing as a clean battle. And that doesn't mean compromising on one's principle, but that means figuring out how to move an organization alongside elements who need to be eventually pushed out. So I think that in terms of building the party, it's like the points that I'd brought forward, right, about the DSA. There needs to be methods of political debate and clarification internally. That's something which Marxist Unity Group is working towards in collaboration with folks from other caucuses. We need to develop a powerful media site as a source of information. I do agree with Spencer, right? That was your name, about the fact that media-wise, like, we have like little like websites here and there, but nothing really broad and comprehensive that reaches into the wider activist mass, worker activist mass. I think DSA is in a position where if we're able to use the millions of dollars of dues that it has to create a big media organization, it could actually like become a really powerful source of propaganda and agitation. Number 3 was adopt methods of discipline for members. And again, all these points that I'm bringing up, like the DSA, for all of its faults, it has internal democracy, which is solely missing from so many sects and these top-down bureaucratic centralist parties. And there's real opportunity here for anyone who actually wants to like fucking fight to go in, mobilize, and push for resolutions and get it passed. So there's a possibility to seize this organization and use it as a weapon. Well, what's a party? A party's a weapon. A party's a weapon to generalize and expand on the instinctive drive for freedom that people have. And I think in terms of one question that was brought up here was we need experience. The socialist needs experience. Well, you can only get experience through struggle. And there's weeks where years happen. That's what the George Floyd protests were. People had experience fighting the fucking cops. People had experience, doing medical care for wounded folks. People had experience at least maintaining an autonomous zone. So those periods are gonna happen, and we need a party that's able to execute. It's as simple as that. We need a party that's able to execute. DSA has the potential to be one, and at this moment when fucking fascism is 2024 is it's right around the corner. I think that organization, if one is willing to fight to transform it, can be a weapon to generalize and expand the worker movement. So I guess that's my closing remarks on that.
I would like to, to give it to closing, yeah.
I'll say once again that the question on the table is a concrete question. It is a question of the concrete situation in our country. The two things, I don't know how close we get to the working class by joining DSA. I don't know that the fight to take over DSA is the fight that we need to expend our energy upon at this time. The other thing is, I'm not convinced that the George Floyd protest were in fact a civil rights movement or a black freedom struggle. I would argue, I guess a deductive argument, 10 black people were killed in Boston. I didn't hear a word from Black Lives Matter. The question is then, what was Black Lives Matter? And their questions, I know from my neighbors in, again, Philadelphia, people would say to me, I don't like Black Lives Matter. I said, why you say that? Because that's not about black people, and it's not. Let's be real. And it was not an uprising. It had more to do with the election of Joe Biden than it did with civil rights. I'll just end on this. Again, it's a concrete question. I think it is often easy to avoid difficult, concrete questions. And this is a difficult question. We should admit it. Experiences of other revolutionary struggles are interesting, but are not necessarily informative. I would say this. I think we would learn more about our people and their capacity by studying the Black Freedom Movement of the 50s and 60s. It's called the Black Freedom Movement, but it was a movement of the people. A leadership emerged out of that, the likes of which we have seldom seen in this country. The only thing comparable to it was the organizing of unorganized industrial unions in the 1930s. That is how great it was. It may have gone beyond that because its ideological framing of the nation and of the capacity of its people. And I'll say this, the great democratic task, I would say revolutionary democratic task, before us as a people is the making of this new people. And we are in the process of seeing it, a making of a new people and of a new nation. I would really like to talk more about that and the mechanisms that we can create where we are to do that. I'll end there. This has been a wonderful conversation, by the way.
Okay. You know, I found it fascinating, actually. And I just want to endorse what was said over here before, that, you know, this discussion about parties, but the low point of labour movement resistance is behind us. No one can predict at what speed, with what ups and downs. You know, I'm talking about the resistance of the major industrial labour unions. I mean, Starbucks and Amazon catch all the headlines, but what the rulers are really worried about is 115,000 railway workers going out on strike and paralysing the country. I'm not deprecating any and all efforts to organise unions, but you have to see where the strength of the industrial working class is. And once that gets moving, then what's posed is an independent party based on the fighting union movement, a Labour Party, which will involve all sorts of tendencies. I'm sure many of us will bump shoulders in such a party in the future. But nothing that's discussed here is going to create, and with all the political differences and ideological confusions and debates and so on, when the working class gets moving, a different thing is involved. That's what happened in the Cuban Revolution, where Fidel Castro pursued a strategy, and he was condemned as ultra-left by the existing Popular Socialist Party and others in Cuba. The history will absolve me speech at his defence over the Moncada attack became the basic program, the revolutionary program of the movement. He announced that he was going to Mexico to come back and wage a fight to topple the dictatorship. Millions of people knew that that's what he was going to do. There were those who said, you shouldn't. But it was mass propaganda, and propaganda doesn't catch what was really going on. They knew that he was committed to this fight to the end. And they won millions in the course of it. There was a general strike, a popular insurrection, and as I mentioned earlier, you know, the party that was leading it kept broadening out. That's what needs to be done. On the dictatorship of the proletariat question, in Nicaragua and Grenada, there were workers' and farmers' governments, a revolutionary overthrow, politically independent of the capitalist rulers, with their own armed forces that were on a road that could have followed the Cuban Revolution. But it didn't get to the stage because of a Stalinist coup in Grenada, because of the Sandinistas retreating from that in the case of Nicaragua. It didn't get to the stage of a workers' state, as happened in Cuba, the dictatorship of the proletariat. This is a more complex question than just today the dictatorship of capital, tomorrow the dictatorship of the proletariat. It was more complicated in Russia. It was just because people were confident that the Bolsheviks would pursue their program. I just want to close on this. There's explosions all around the world, toppling governments, Sri Lanka, Sudan, Haiti. I mean, it's mind-boggling the number of countries where, because of the crisis of rising prices and the capitalist rulers in these countries have absolutely no solution. They don't have any solution for the people there, and the rulers of the biggest imperialist countries like here have no solution for humanity. Look at what's happening in Iran at the moment and the explosion of protests there. In 1979, there was a genuine mass political revolution. Millions of working people, the strikes in the oil fields. Sorry, I'll just wrap up on this. Anyway, there was a genuine revolution, and there was no leadership. So the clerical counter-revolution really only succeeded by about 1983. It's a complicated thing, but anyway, the question of leadership is decisive, and what happens. You know, this discussion has helped me to see on a different level why what happens in this country is going to be so important for the world and for the future of humanity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to all our panelists and to all of you out there for attending. What's that?
Rosa, could you announce when our events take place at the new school?
So tomorrow we'll have a teach-in on Frantz Fanon's Wretched of the Earth right here in this room at 1:30. And then afterwards we'll have their last panel of the weekend. It will be called What is the Critique of Capitalism? It will also be in this room at 4:30. So for people at the new school who don't know, we have our reading groups every Tuesday from 6 to 9 p.m. and our coffee breaks every Wednesday at the Lane Cafe from 2 to 5. So feel free to come by.